I'm just laughing because he got beat up so bad. He got beat up so bad. Sorry, I'm just laughing. He got beat up so bad. Sorry, I'm just laughing.
Welcome to the motherfucking relay where we're covering today's top boxing news.
Okay, we'll start with this. Josh Warrington had this to say. He says, the Kansu fight will be more exciting than either the Shakur Stevenson fights or Gary Russell fights. We know that even though there is no date set for the fight, both parties have formally agreed the times. Thus, once boxing resumes, we're in store for a real treat. To that, Josh Warrington stated, it will be a barnstormer. When you look at the other champions in the division, Gary Russell and Shakur Stevenson, you know the build-up is going to be entertaining, but is the fight going to be entertaining? Because Shakur likes to move on the back foot, and Gary Russell is known for his speed, but doesn't work too much. He chooses when he wants to do his work. But with Kansu, you know, as the first bell goes, he's running to the center of the ring and going hell for leather. And obviously, I like to do that as well. I don't get the impression that Josh Warrington is attempting to denigrate the other world champions in the division so much as characterize what the aesthetic of a fight between him and them would look like individually. As all these aforementioned champions have particular base styles that make for a particular aesthetic in regards to Josh. That if it's Josh and Shakur, that's really going to be more of a chess match, or at least that's how Shakur is going to play it, because Shakur is a very skilled guy, young guy, and he's a lot more subtle, a lot more nuanced than Kansu. But I think the same rings true in the case of Mr. Gary Russell Jr. They're all quality fights at the end of the day, but they all would have a different aesthetic than the other, it being that these fighters have different physical dimensions, different base styles, different nuances, different characteristics altogether. And in the case of Josh and Kansu, that's a firefight. That's the only way to describe it, to characterize it, as both Josh and Khan, they play into each other's strengths. You know, Josh ain't afraid to let his hands go, but neither is Kansu. And when you put two guys like that in the same ring at the same time, you know you're going to get fireworks. And that's not saying that a fight with Gary or a fight with Shakur wouldn't yield excitement of its own, but it would be a different situation as opposed to the Kansu situation. When it comes to a potential Josh Warrington versus Shakur Stevenson situation, oh, there's intrigue. There is. But it's for different reasons. You see, Shakur Stevenson is the youngest of all the world champions in this weight class. More so, he's young overall. Shakur's only 22 years old. He's got a pro record of 13 pro fights, 13-0. 13 wins, 7 knockouts.
No losses.
To Josh Warrington, who's got a pro record of 30-0. 30 professional wins, no losses, 7 knockouts. In that situation, the excitement, as it were, the air of intrigue is whether or not Shakur is ready for this kind of an opponent, because Shakur ain't but 22 years old. 22 years old, only 13 pro fights, shows all the promise, has all the tools of what could be the next generation's pound-for-pound fighter.
Yes, he does.
But at 13-0 here today, there is a question as to whether or not he's ready for that kind of fight. And that's the sizzle. That's the selling point. That is the intrigue. It's a fight that has its own characteristics, its own properties, as opposed to the Kansu fight, which is a more straightforward situation. You know what Kansu comes to do, you know what he's bringing to the table, and if you don't, it just so happens we discussed it earlier this week, and I'll leave the link to that video in the description box. I don't think that Josh is taking a stab at the other world champions per se, but he is addressing something very real, that Kansu, he's not the least bit subtle, this guy. And because he's not, a fight between him and Josh really is a firefight. It's a question of who's bringing the bigger guns to what is the gun show. in a Gary Russell situation, it's a similar situation to the Shakur Stevenson situation in the sense that Gary's got nuances, Gary's got subtleties. Gary's not just going to come plodding forward looking to get mid-range to inside and let the fists fly. No, Gary's a more educated puncher than that. And the intrigue of that kind of fight is whether or not Josh can contend with the hand speed and the boxing of a Gary Russell Jr.
That's the question.
The longest reigning champion in this weight class. You know, just speaking of Gary and speaking of Shakur had this to say about Gary. He says, Gary ain't no punk. I don't think he's ducking me. He was quoted as saying, Gary ain't no punk. He ain't one of them fighters that'll duck people. Gary knows me a lot. We didn't come up together. I came up under him. But I've been in his gym. I spar his brother all the time. Me and him have been in the same gym right after my world title fight. Me and him was going back and forth playing around with each other, talking about me and him fighting each other. I think he's got a lot of respect for me, and I've got a lot of respect for him. But if that's the fight the fans want, I think we'll do it. I'll fight anybody. I'll say that. We got a friendship going. He's kind of like a big brother to me, so I don't think he's ducking me. I just think he's not thinking about me and him as a fight that could actually happen. And I feel inclined to agree with Shakur Stevenson in regards to Gary Russell Jr. He just doesn't strike me as the kind of fighter that avoids other fighters. If anything, he's being avoided by a guy who's on the same side of the street as him. But Gary, you know, if certain things haven't happened for Gary, I think that has more to do with either other people, the politics of boxing, the bureaucracy, the red tape, and the side of the street that he's on, in all honesty, because I do happen to think that we would see a more active Gary Russell if he were with either Top Rank or Matchroom, as opposed to the PBC. The PBC that, in many ways, enables these fighters to take these long hiatuses where they're sparsely active. You rarely ever see the guy. I mean, I say it all the time, Gary Russell's been fighting once a year for the past 5 years, and it looks like this is going to be the 6th, given the global pandemic and what it's doing to boxing. That, for now, the entire world of boxing, the entire world, is on hold, it's on pause. And, you know, just with Gary, it's not a situation like Shakur Stevenson's situation to where you're a young guy, a young champion, but you're still earning your stripes. No, with Gary, you know what you're dealing with. You know he's a quality fighter. You know he knows what he's doing. You know he knows how to handle himself. And what he really needs now are the biggest situations he can be involved in, because he's 31 years old.
Getting any younger.
This year's turning out to be a wash for almost everybody. You know, I mean, it is. And
31?
Gary's the oldest of the 4 world champions in the featherweight division. The clock is ticking. Big moves need to be made so that big fights can happen. You know, we're hearing Gary talk about going up there and fight Gervonta Davis, right? And, you know, the only way that fight could have a competitive element is if the contest takes place at a prescribed weight of 130 pounds. That would require Gary to move up and Gervonta to move down. Truth, I'm not a big fan of that fight because I really am tired of seeing Gervonta Davis try to lock horns with smaller guys than himself. So I'm really not a big fan of that fight. But if the fight is to be competitive, it would have to take place at 130 pounds. Perhaps the trek downstairs would take enough off of Gervonta Davis's performance that Gary could take over and perhaps stand a fighting chance. I think the same is true of the Leo Santa Cruz situation. The Santa Cruz situation that in all likelihood is going to be the next situation for Gervonta Davis. Just don't like the idea of Gary standing in line to be the next little guy that Gervonta Davis fights. I don't like the idea of that, but, you know, that seems to be what's going on. I'd much rather see Gary cross the street to either a Top Rank or a Matchroom, preferably a Matchroom, as, you know, they've got the fights, they've got the fight dates, they've got the fighters. That would put him in a prime position to challenge the winner of Kansu versus Josh Warrington, which would arguably be the biggest fight of Gary Russell Jr.'s career, the biggest fight that he's ever been involved in. You know, so long as he stays on the PBC side of the street, his situation is a self-imposed situation. It is a self-inflicted wound, as on that side, you are isolated, cut off from everybody else. So what are you going to do? You going to stay there? All right, if that's what you want. But I do happen to agree with Shakur Stevenson. Gary Russell Jr. doesn't strike me as the kind of fighter who avoids fights, avoids other fighters, so much as he finds himself in this situation due to the bureaucracy, the red tape, the politics of boxing. But it is up to him to remedy that situation. It is up to him to do something about it. That if you ain't getting the kind of fights that you want on that side of the street, well, maybe you need to go somewhere else. Tell you that the featherweight division has no shortage of talent, but if he wants to be part of the bigger picture, he's got to change his ambiance. I say it all the time. You know, there's a reason that Josh Warrington might end up being the first world champion of the 4 world champions in the division to unify, as opposed to Gary, as opposed to Shakur. There's a reason that it's happening that way, and it has a lot to do with the outfit that he's with. You know, some outfits want to make the biggest fights, and some don't. It's up to you which outfit you want to be a part of. Moving on. Dillian White had this to say. He says, I would have destroyed that coward, Deontay Wilder. He's quoted as saying, it's ridiculous of a third fight done. Considering he lost the first fight, I think Tyson Fury is better than him in every department. What's he going to change now that he hasn't changed in the last 12, 15 years? Nothing. He's going to change nothing. White, pursuant to the WBC's order, is due a world title shot by February of 2021. He details that Wilder's shortcomings in the rematch with Fury is proof of why he has never selected as an opponent for the Bronze Bomber. He can't throw a jab. He can't box, said White. His balance is terrible. His neck is too weak, and he doesn't hit as hard as everyone says. For him, it's more timing and speed. That allowed him to knock out the guys he did. It's not like he's such a devastating puncher. You look at his record, he hasn't really knocked out anyone of note, really. Now you know why the coward ran away from me for so long. I was his #1 challenger since 2017, yet he never wanted to fight me and ducked and swerved my rightful shot for 900 days, pathetically hiding behind the WBC and begging them to allow him to fight anyone but me. I would have destroyed him, and he knows it. I want to say that when Tyson Fury eats, Dillian White don't shit.
Okay.
And I say that to say this, that Tyson Fury's performance in both of the Deontay Wilder fights doesn't necessarily lend an insight into what a Dillian White versus Wilder fight would look like. They're different guys that are built differently and fight differently.
They do.
I can think of a few reasons why Dillian White could have given Deontay Wilder problems. Because Dillian White is a mid-range to inside guy. He knows how to pressure a guy. He's got a quality left hook. These are the attributes that he would have brought to the table in a Wilder fight. But as it stands,
They never fought.
Tyson Fury and what he did to Wilder is no insight into what Dillian would have done to Wilder. In truth, that is a case of apples and oranges. The news here is that Dillian White's world title opportunity for the WBC title, that's due in February of next year. This year, pretty much being a wash, pushing everything that what was to be back several months. You gotta wonder that Dillian White won't stand in the way of the undisputed heavyweight title fight between the winner of Wilder vs. Fury 3 and the winner of Joshua vs. Pulev. You gotta wonder that Dillian White, having waited so long to fight for that green belt, 900 days, it's gonna be well over 900 days by the time February rolls around, you know? And you can't say that Dillian didn't earn his way. You can't say that he doesn't deserve a title shot, that he doesn't deserve his shot. You really can't say that. I mean, if this guy's outraged, if he's impatient, if he proves to be difficult by the time February rolls around, you really can't blame him.
You can't.
And I'll say that I think, given the scale, the scope of an undisputed heavyweight title fight, the WBC might be lenient. They might not want to stand in the way of what could be Fury versus Joshua.
Might not.
They might not. But Dillian White, well, that's quite another matter. And I think it's going to take some serious compensation in order to step aside, as he's got leverage in the situation. He has a say in the matter. He has a legal right to fight for the WBC title. And no fight between Anthony Joshua and the winner of Fury versus Wilder 3 can go down without Dillian White's blessing, without him giving them the green light. I mean, you can't reach a step-aside deal with this guy if he doesn't agree to step aside. I want to say that, you know, a couple of months ago, Dillian White was actually under criticism with some people. And it's because he so decided to walk away from the Anthony Joshua fight because he didn't like the money. He felt he deserved more, and he wasn't going to get more. He didn't have enough leverage in the situation in order to get more, so he decided to step off, walk away, back himself, bank on himself. This received mixed reviews, it did, but time has proven Dillian White a very sharp pencil. You see, everybody's all caught up talking about what could be Joshua versus Fury. How does that fight break down? What does a fight like that look like? Who wins that fight? Is it a two-fight engagement? This is what dominates the conversation when the conversation is had, with people not realizing, that fight doesn't happen unless Dillian White steps aside. I mean, you do realize that, right?
Right.
That in order for those two guys to lock horns, what has to happen first is Dillian White has to let them fight. And that could prove to be a very lucrative situation for Dillian White in more ways than one. You hypothesize that Dillian White tells those guys, hey, I'll let you guys fight if you give me X amount of dollars. Then you guys can fight. You fucking guys can kill each other, okay? You do that, but I get the winner. Let's make that clear. That's 2 paydays, folks. 2 very sizable paydays. The way, Dillian White would be compensated for stepping aside, but he's still in a pole position to challenge the winner, and his title shot will go from being a title shot for the WBC to a title shot for all the titles, all the belts, all the marbles. It's a win-win for Dillian White. And on the off chance that somehow, some way, Deontay Wilder gets it together and beats Tyson Fury in a third fight to where he couldn't do nothing with him in the second fight. If by some chance this happens, Dillian White still gets what he wants because he'd still be in a pole position to challenge him. I mean, you talk about playing your cards right, and that's what Dillian White did here, though it wasn't without its risks. You talk about Dillian White going through with that Oscar Rivas fight when most other fighters would have told the WBC, hey, go fuck yourself, okay? I'm not fighting in any more eliminators for you fucks. You've been wasting my time for well over a year, 2 years, going on 3 years, alright? Fuck you guys. But he went through with the fight, and as a result of that, he's in a pole position to make some big things happen for himself. He just has to make it through Alexander Povetkin. A risky fight, all things considered. Alexander Povetkin is still a top 10 fighter. I mean, that he's getting up there in age is without question, but he still is one of the more skilled guys, durable guys, with one of the better left hooks in this weight class. White versus Povetkin is essentially the battle of the devastating left hooks, as Povetkin's got his, but Dillian has his own as well. Very nice situation, very risky fight, and this is why Dillian White has amassed the following that he has amassed, that this is a guy that you really can't complain about. So, while Dillian White might not have any shortage of words for Deontay Wilder, as far as Wilder, that guy's old news. That situation is come and gone, and what Dillian needs to focus on now is making it through Alexander Povetkin, because on the other side of that fight lie all the rewards for Dillian White.